Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on disaster recovery communication solutions, featuring our guest, Chris Hillis, who is co-founder of the Information Technology Disaster Resource Center. Also joining us is Cambium Networks' Ray Savage, who is Director of Product Marketing. If at any point you have questions, please enter them in the questions box, and this webinar will also be recorded and posted to our online community. At this point, I'll pass things over to our presenter, Chris Hillis. Hi, Chris.
Good morning, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. So how about you give us a little introduction to who you are and ITDRC?
Certainly. So a little bit about myself. I'm not much on self-promotion, but I will say that I'm one of the co-founders of ITDRC. I have had the distinct honor of seeing and helping ITDRC grow from just a handful of volunteers about 10 years ago to kind of the robust professional organization that it is today. I do wear dozens of hats, but I spend much of my time working on our hardware and systems that we deploy. We're constantly evaluating the systems that we put into the field and, iterating on those so that way we can improve our service delivery to those that we serve. I am a lifelong Texan. I live in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and I'm based out of our Central Service Center, which is basically the logistics hub of ITDRC's operations. It's where we manage our fleet of assets and our entire inventory that is the main central hub. My background is my formal education is in emergency management in IT. It kind of explains my passion for integrating technology and disaster response and recovery, or kind of what we call disaster tech. About ITDRC, we are a nationwide volunteer-driven nonprofit that provides a multitude of technical resources in communities in crisis. We provide communications, technical resources that allow first responders, relief organizations, and survivors to respond and recover from disaster. So things like compute resources, think laptops, Chromebooks, tablets, those types of things. Voice over IP telephony, internet connectivity by a kind of an array of WAN acquisition methods, and full network stacks that can scale from small teams to something as large as a 2,000 bed shelter. So our mission, as you see here, is to harness the collective resources of the technology community to provide, all of these services at no cost. So a couple of quick statistics here. We've got a little over 2,000 volunteers across the U.S. and territories. We do have the ability to, kind of plus up, if you will, and pull into some of our networks to get additional resources as needed. In our 10-year history, in our 12-year history, I guess at this point, we've responded to over 100 state and federally declared disaster responses, serving millions and millions of people. Our largest operation was the Joplin tornado in 2011, and our largest operation was Hurricane Maria back in 2017. So a couple of stats from 2019, we did 16 operations, and as you can see here, the number of new sites we did were 156, but we continue to manage sites from previous disasters. So, at any given point, we're continuing to manage, hundreds of sites. The fair market value of our services is over $5 million. Just taking a kind of a quick look at where we've been in the history of the organization. Any of the green balloons, these are our open sites or permanent sites where we still have hardware, or we're still providing services to communities, post disaster. And the small red dots are sites that may have been open or have been open in the past and have since been closed. So our volunteers, they contribute tens of thousands of hours, and we deploy these millions of dollars of equipment to all of these disasters across the country. And what's kind of really neat about what we do is that the fair market value of our services help to offset the community's out-of-pocket expense that they have to have for their public assistance grants and their federal match. How do we triage who gets the cut of our services? So first and foremost, right after a disaster, we're looking to provide support to public safety and first responders. So they get the first cut of our resources really before we start to look and see where we can kind of go from there. But things like police, fire, EMS, hospitals, any type of critical infrastructure, key resources. And from there, we step it down and we're looking at mass care. So we're providing support to other nonprofits who are actually engaging directly with survivors to do feeding and sheltering, survivor reunification, and other types of things. And from there, we really kind of step down into community recovery and long-term recovery. So we talk about volunteer and donations management, some of these groups that are going to be in their communities well after the disaster is over. These communities are going to take years to recover, sometimes even decades after a large event. So we want to continue to provide resources to those who have been affected. And after the news cameras go home, these communities are still affected. They still have things going on, and they're going to be recovering for quite some time. So some of the things when we talk emergency services, we're providing internet backhaul. Sometimes we have to get that in creative ways. Sometimes it's pretty standard. But we're providing internet connectivity. We're providing the network infrastructure. We do call centers and provide portable radios, land mobile radios, computers. Do a little bit of aerial damage assessment, and then just provide general technical assistance. So sometimes these field EOCs are set up. There may be zero infrastructure existing. They may be going into an abandoned Walmart or something like that. And so we can kind of create solutions to, bring the infrastructures to them and help with that. What do we do to support the NGOs and other relief organizations? Things like multi-agency resource centers, those are called MARCs. That's where direct survivors come in and they find, what resources are available to them post-disaster. How can they, get assistance to services that may be provided in the community. Donations warehouses. Donations are kind of the second disaster in the disaster. Everybody wants to have goodwill and donate things, but that has to be managed. So inventory systems for those, able to implement systems that way we can track all the donations, because those like our services have value to the community for their public match. Reunification centers after large disasters, if people are looking for loved ones, we may stand up call centers there, and other things just like logistics staging sites and other long-term recovery type operations. Direct survivor support, we put Wi-Fi in shelters. As you can see here, this gentleman's putting one in a Red Cross shelter that was used at a fairgrounds after the Camp Fire in 2018. So we do provide Wi-Fi in shelters. We also provide public computers where somebody can come and get on disaster assistance or file insurance, check their email, check in with loved ones. We do provide telephones for those who may not have access to smartphones or tablets that they can bring with them. We work with our partners to provide TV programming and charging stations. So, as somebody who is could potentially be displaced either by a fire or a hurricane, tornado, those types of things, sometimes they come with the clothes on their back. Sometimes they come, sometimes they're more, have a chance to bring more with them. So we're trying to cater to just about everyone. So let's talk about infrastructure loss. Different events will have different effects on infrastructure. So for instance, on the left side of the screen here, a Category 5 hurricane can topple massive towers. This picture was taken after Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. And on the right side, you can see that flooding can completely submerge your infrastructure as well. So when you look at what you may have available to you day to day, there's a very real chance that it's going to be unusable, or it's going to be completely destroyed or complete loss. So sometimes that equipment can be salvaged, it can be reused, but there's other disasters if we want to just completely go to the other end of the spectrum, where the infrastructure may be perfectly fine, but it may be crippled by high demand, by high use. So, right after a big event happens, there may be overload of cell networks, people trying to call their loved ones, people trying to dial 911. Looking at the entire end of this, the entire spectrum, there's a possibility that terrestrial networks could be down for weeks, even months after a major event. So definitely plan accordingly when you're looking to, implement alternative solutions and stand up alternative sites. What are some different ways that you can, access the internet? How do you get your WAN? So, One other thing to kind of keep in mind is that during an emergency or another large-scale disaster, that sometimes carriers limit, the amount of broadband data that's available on cell towers to kind of accommodate more phone calls. So your only option may be to send text messages, depending on cell site capability. It's definitely recommended. So when it comes to getting that WAN connection in the field, we have a little saying that goes, buy, beg, or borrow, but please don't steal. There are a lot of creative ways that we can obtain, that nice little slice of the internet, some which may be more widely available depending on the incident. But, there are options like using cellular gateways. Those may work well in populated areas if the cell network, doesn't have any capacity issues. But you may be looking at, using something like VSAT, satellite internet, depending on the type of hardware and service. That could, suffer from things like high latency. When you think about the round trip time, going to space and back. So you got that to consider. And then also, they're susceptible to rain fade, depending on the type of system. But most of you on this webinar are probably going to be familiar with one of the better options for long hauls, which is include point-to-point and point-to-multi-point solutions via the wireless shot. So extending an existing unaffected facilities connection to a temporary shelter or EOC may be one of the best options for getting access to connectivity where you need it. So pictures on the outer, the left and the right up here, both of those deployed some Cambium equipment in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. And the center is where we had to use some VSAT after Hurricane Michael in 2018. So what are some must-haves for deployable networks? So when we design and we implement these hastily formed networks, we want to do everything we can to protect the end users on the network. Segmenting networks using multiple VLANs is a great way to ensure that the data stays where it belongs, if you will. A good example may be a shelter where you have staff that are on one VLAN. And then we can have, the ability to, communicate with things like printers or network storage or those types of things where the staff may need to have access to it, where we want to keep the survivors kind of completely separate. Give them their own VLAN where the only place they can go is out through the gateway. To further add to that and kind of build upon that, client isolation is a great way to ensure that the devices aren't talking to each other. And we're going to try and decrease the chance for any like malicious scanning or the spread of malware by infected devices. Traffic shaping, well, sometimes it's kind of frowned upon in a normal day-to-day operations. Can do some funky things to your traffic, have some adverse effects. But that can be a great way to ensure that any available bandwidth that you do have can be managed effectively. So we may choose to throttle or block applications like Windows updates, backups, video streaming, gaming apps, those types of things to improve the experience overall. And that comes into play, especially when we're looking at connections that may be constrained, like satellite internet. And then finally, one thing to consider is to deploy a robust filtering solution. So we want to ensure that we're blocking traffic that may be going to questionable sources, like whether it's botnets or phishing sites and those types of things. So really and truly, when we look at how do we protect our end users, that's one thing that we can look at. So we can do this through some layer 7 filtering on some hardware, as through DNS filtering, such as like OpenDNS or Umbrella. I know Cloudflare's got a solution. So there are some different options that you can look at for trying to protect the end users on your network. So real quick, switching gears and talking about COVID-19. We have this, pandemic that is kind of a first seen in our lifetimes, right? So really and truly, it's driven a lot of things, and we're doing a lot of things differently. Everybody's working at home, schools are out. So ITDRC is, responding to this different type of disaster, if you will. So across the country, we've received quite a number of requests from different verticals. So we're looking at some of our government, tribal, nonprofit, medical, and education. So we are supporting sites mainly with compute devices, some sites with connectivity. But as we've looked at the surge capacity, everybody's being forced to stay home and social distance. There has been quite an uptick in requests for our services to be able to support that. Which kind of segues me into a new initiative that we're doing because of this, which is called our projectConnect. So the goal of projectConnect is to connect as many students as possible. We're targeting rural and underserved areas because we recognize that this issue is not new. The digital divide is not new. The broadband gap is not new. There's plenty of data that goes back many years supporting that it exists and it has existed, and we're not doing enough to kind of provide resources for these areas. So COVID-19 has really just exacerbated that. So what we're doing is we're looking for communities that have unmet connectivity needs. We're kind of reaching out, working with the communities, finding, where we can work with anchor institutions, libraries, schools, and those types of things to try and extend, existing backhaul where available to parking lots, so people can come and get in their cars and safely get on the internet to do homework, apply for unemployment, and those types of things. So I know as we continue to progress and as things are changing and things are starting to slowly open up, one thing that has become very apparent is that a majority of states are not having their schools reopen for the rest of the academic year. So as things progress, we know that there's still going to be a huge need for connectivity in these areas. So if you know of or you're from an area where a program like this could benefit, there's the URL down below. It's go.itdrc.org/projectconnect. We'd be happy to take the community submissions. And again, this program is provided at no cost to the community. So what are things you can do to get involved? We talk about projectConnect, and we hope that you will reach out to your networks to identify unmet needs. So your customers, whether they're small businesses that are doing good in the community, nonprofits, hospitals, those types of things. Reach out to your networks and see how you can help. Is there anything that you can be doing to provide something? I know there are a lot of WISPs that are engaged with their local communities right now to create homework hotspots and local pavilions and those types of things. So another way that you can give back is to just encourage your peers and team members to volunteer, and that's either locally, if you have a source for work, or things that you want to do to give back, or through ITDRC. We are that service-oriented professional organization, if you will, that looks to give and use our skills in times of need. So really encourage you to do that. And I guess that's it. So last slide here is a little bit about ITDRC. If you're looking to get engaged, of a need or anything like that, whether it's projectConnect or unrelated, there's our 24/7 line, as well as our support app, which hits our ticketing system. So we're happy to entertain and take and field whatever requests you may have or know of. And I guess at this point, that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Hi, Chris. This is Ray Savage from Cambium, and thank you so much for all the great work that you do. I think as you look at it, one of the things that's most attractive about ITDRC is that it's really technology agnostic, vendor agnostic. You're just out to try and help people however you possibly can. I certainly appreciate that. I guess
Yeah.
if
Go ahead.
If other wireless ISPs or managed service providers are looking to help out, it's great that you share this information, because so many people have great intentions, but they don't have the depth of experience that you do. So I guess one question I would have is, what are one or two best practices that you keep in mind for somebody who's just starting out for the first time? What would you recommend, one or two things that they keep in mind?
I would say keep your end user in mind. At the end of the day, we're dealing with vulnerable populations, and whether that's a disaster or those who don't have access to the internet on a regular basis. So it's really about the safety and security of them and keeping them in mind, because they're going to put a lot of trust in you to provide them with a resource that they may not have any other way to have access to. So keeping them in mind, and just know that. At the end of the day, it's about doing good by the people that we serve.
Great, and I'd encourage any of you on the line right now, if you do have a question, you can just type it into the question and answer box, and we'll present your questions to Chris. Boy, when there is a disaster and something comes up, at a very, very high level, what are the steps that you go through to mobilize?
So typically, when we're kind of getting ready, we're monitoring news. We're reaching out to our partners who, state and local, government resources. We are a member of National VOAD and a number of state VOADs, and VOADs are the voluntary organizations active in disaster. So when you think of those organizations that, provide services, in times of disasters, think of your Red Crosses, Team Rubicon, Salvation Army. We're working with our partners who, in some cases, are already on the ground. They have that source of truth. They have that knowledge. So we do get a lot of information from them. And we're working with our partners to identify those unmet needs. It's given what we do, sometimes it's it's a little bit of a niche, right? Sometimes there's a huge need for what we have, and sometimes maybe there's not, and sometimes there's a lag, right? We may see a large event that happens on the news, and you just see the devastation, but sometimes the communities aren't ready to accept the help, or they don't know what they need, and so really and truly we're looking at that. So that's kind of where we kind of pull in all of our resources and pull our networks, and then from there, we'll send out an advanced team to get out into the community, shake hands, figure out what we can do to support, and it really just kind of slides downhill from there. Standing up the operation, pulling in volunteers, and sending them out in the community to do some good.
Man, that is great work, and it's got to be especially tricky now where you've got multiple simultaneous disasters going on nationwide.
It really is. So, tornado outbreak across the Southeast, last week, we're looking at how do we provide, support to these communities that have just been affected. And then, the overarching COVID-19, how do we do it safely, right? How do we provide services that we're accustomed to doing, but then how do we add this other complex layer to, making sure that we're keeping our volunteers safe, and those types of things. So it's become a little more complex currently, but I think we'll all persevere.
And projectConnect, that sounds really ambitious. But a lot of times when people picture, we're going to bridge the digital divide, it seems like some huge program. I'm sure that in an individual basis, it could be, a very small project, but just helps to bridge the digital divide. Can you tell us about some of the smaller projects that make an immediate difference?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. We know that our projectConnect is not going to put hotspots in every rural home in a community. But I think what we're really looking to do is to identify what's there and extend it and make it make it more widely available. So, for instance, there's a community right up on the Texas-Oklahoma border, Pottsboro, Texas. In town, I think there's resources available at the library. They've been very much able to extend the Wi-Fi into the parking lot, but a lot of students who may be in the rural parts of the county who may not be able to make that trek all the way into town to take advantage of those resources. So we partnered with the library, and we partnered with a local business up there to be able to put a hotspot trailer in the parking lot. And so the trailer itself, it's solar powered. It has a broadband modem in it that pulls in a WAN from the cellular network, and then from there we have an outdoor access point that kind of creates this little Wi-Fi bubble and a hotspot in this parking lot. Where the students at the apartments that are immediately adjacent to it, if they don't have internet at home, they can come over to the parking lot, drive over, park, whichever, and be able to get online. So we know we're not going to be able to serve every individual, but we're trying to make as best of an effort as we can to at least bring some alternative solutions in this temporary times. And part of projectConnect, where we can work with libraries and those types of things, the hardware we're going to be putting into these communities, we anticipate on leaving. It's going to be granted to the libraries, it's going to be granted to the schools and those types of things where, hey, we're providing you the hardware, but ultimately you're going to, you're going to end up managing it, and it will be available for, as long as the receiver is willing to support it.
That's outstanding. Olivia, are there any questions on the line right now?
Yes, there is one question, Chris. So one person is interested in knowing if you've established any disaster setups in India, and if you've provided your service in any of the Asia Pacific region.
So ITDRC is a United States domestic response organization. There are other organizations that do international response. They do provide connectivity, and that would be NetHope. So NetHope they take care of international, and we basically take care of the domestic. So, if you're looking to look at other organizations who do similar, I'd recommend taking a look at NetHope to see what they may have to be able to provide in APAC and India.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chris. Thank you for all that you do every day, in addition to the time that you've spent with us here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and yeah, I appreciate the platform, and I hope that this was helpful to your audience.